Hey, what's up, you guys? I'm Ann Richmond, aka Hearthsinger, the head bard in charge round these parts. And today I want to talk to you about gatekeeping. Specifically, what happens when we've worked really hard to create a welcoming environment at the table, and then we sort of forget to think actively about how to create that environment. This is where I want to talk to you about the last bastions of gatekeeping, the little invisible micro things that we do that make people say, you know what, I don't think this hobby is for me. So let's figure out how to avoid that, shall we? The first thing I want to dive into, and it's a little bit of a hot take, is telling too many stories about your D&D game. Is it possible to tell too many stories about a storytelling game? Well, yeah. Sure, if I have been following along with a friend's game and I am invested in it, or if somebody else is playing maybe Curse of Strahd and I want to hear about the choices they made that differ from the choices or opportunities I had to affect that story, absolutely. Those things make sense. But when you're sitting down with somebody that you want to play D&D with you, and then you overload them with all of these incredibly long, detailed stories about what you like about the game and the things that your characters have experienced, that's a lot to live up to. And sometimes it's just a lot to even want to care about if somebody has no frame of reference for what you're talking about. You need to read the room, and admittedly, I am terrible at creating an elevator pitch for what's going on in my games. In general, if I'm talking to somebody new who hasn't come and asked me specifically, and they are interested in hearing about my game and kind of think they might want to play D&D, I'll try to distill it down to its base attributes, like my long-winded Calliope Rhymestaff story, which I have an awesome video about if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, which I'll put up there. But also being able to say to somebody, a bard is a magician who uses music and art to infuse their spells, and a lot of people play them as these lascivious characters who whine and wench all over the realm, but mine is actually a mom who has lived, maybe a decade past her adventuring prime, but is now hitting the road again to resolve unfinished business. Yeah, I'd say that that's just an easier frame of reference than the many-minute video I made early on in my channel. I said this was going to be a hot take, and maybe it's less of one than I thought, but I guess the spiciest part is that I don't think anyone really wants to hear about your D&D character, unless they're specifically asking you, and then you should ask yourself, why is this person asking me about my D&D character? I don't mean to make you doubt people's interest in you or your stories, but yeah, I think it's better to err on the side of caution of saying too much than open up the can of worms of your excitement and then find that it's an hour later and that person is like, wow, that sounds super cool. Ooh. If you disagree, absolutely let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. So how do I get from telling a story to being a gatekeeper? It seems a little bit of a stretch, but when you think about it from the point of view of when somebody who's listening to all of this is sitting there, they're thinking, how long are these games? How many sessions have you played? How much commitment do I have to give in order to try this? It can just be a lot to take in, and I find that people who ultimately I think would have a fun time sometimes are more reticent to try because I've built it up to be this incredible thing that means so much to me, and rightly so, because it does. But you just want to be really careful about making it seem approachable and fun if you really want that person to want to feel like there might be a spot for them to carve out their own version of what D&D means to them. Now, when a new person wants to join, it can be super overwhelming and very tempting for everybody to want to help them. This leads to a lot of over-explanation. But handing them a giant tome to just go through on their own, well, that's a lot too. Neither option is great. So you need to focus more on figuring out what kind of help a new player wants. Do they want you to help them figure out the differences between the classes and then have some more easy references for what to read so they don't have to look through the whole book? Do they want to start by looking at all the different ancestries and decide from there? Or do they just want to not be overwhelmed at all and say, I want to play a classic sorcerer, and then pick that? Or say, I want to be Katniss Everdeen. How do I do that? Let them choose an archetype and then build a character for them, but only if that's the path they want. You can provide help, of course, as they want or need it, but you don't want to overshadow their entry point into the hobby. It needs to be their own, and allowing them to have some subtle key points of agency as you try to help them enter it is really key in helping them feel like this is a place where they belong. This next one is a mistake I've absolutely made, and it's telling somebody that I don't think they'll enjoy the experience of a class before they have a chance to understand what they're choosing or not choosing. A really good example is I have a lot of friends who've said, ooh, I want to be a druid. I want to have control over the natural world and transform into a cat because I like cats. Whatever the reason is, saying that, ooh, that's not a great idea for a new player because it's just really complicated, can create a weird well of fear in a person. Wow, my first idea that felt so natural was actually the wrong answer. What am I doing here? Why am I even trying this thing that seems like scary and uncomfortable? It's definitely good to let people know what they're getting into, but try to use language that doesn't judge the choice. Like, hey, that's really cool. Druids are awesome because they can do a lot of things. So you'll have a whole set of shape-shifting abilities and all sorts of stats for each of the animals you can turn into. I have a deck for that if you want to use it to help you organize what you can choose. Your spells, they can be a lot of different things. They could be damage based or healing based or utility, but all, within the realms of controlling nature. And then on top of that, you get to choose the different spells each day. So every time the characters go to sleep and wake up, you're going to be choosing new spells, whereas other classes, just kind of get what they get and they don't get upset. If you present it that way, they know that they're going to be getting into a character with a lot of paperwork and a lot of bookkeeping and tracking. They may then decide for themselves that seems crazy, or they might say, wow, are other characters like that? Are there any that have a little bit less of that? That's really overwhelming. Or is there any way to be, nature based, but in a different type of class that might be simpler? Then it's in their mind to get to make that choice, and they can understand it rather than just be told, don't worry, it's not for you at this time. It might be something for later, because there might not be a later, especially if you make things seem so overwhelmingly complicated at the start. One last bastion of gatekeeping that happens during the game is something that I actually talked about in a previous video, my video about how to make combat fun, which I'll link above there if you want to check it out. But it's talking over other people on their turn, either in private conversations to the side or in an effort to help that person through their turn. You just got to kind of let the DM run it. And if you get asked for help because you've played that class before, because the DM needs to sort something else, they know you know the answer, then that's great. But help keep that experience about the player who's making the choice and less about your desire to help move through the turn quickly or help them understand. People are intelligent. They can figure it out. You got here somehow, you dingus. So expect that other people are going to be able to figure it out. Yeah, their turns might be a little bit slower in the beginning. They may misunderstand rules, but that's part of it, and we all went through it. So it's just part of having a new player at the table, and you really need to let them get through that experience on their own instead of creating more tension around it by over providing help. Because again, it probably comes from a really good, sweet place, but it can make somebody feel like, man, if I didn't have everybody else at this table, I wouldn't be here and be able to do anything. And to that end, maybe I just don't want to be here. That's my 2 cents on it, at least. The last thing I want to talk about is when somebody expresses a need. They don't think that something that happened at the table felt safe, or they want to talk in a public forum on Twitter or, on Facebook or wherever about a problematic element of the storytelling that's going on, a lot of people tend to respond with, man, I've never had that problem at my table, but to each their own. Or, I guess if you want to play it that way, everybody's table is different. The truth is that, I don't think those comments are inherently coming from a bad place. But you have to ask yourself, if somebody who has a marginalized voice is coming forward and expressing somebody, or somebody who's been hurt by something that happened at their table is coming forward and expressing something that is a lived experience. And while you might not have it, saying, wow, that happened, it doesn't happen for me, so I guess I'm good, is super dismissive. In our effort to be accepting and loving towards all players of this game that we love and this hobby that we love, that we can do better in terms of just liking. You don't always have to reply to something. You don't always have something to add, but you can make sure that more people see it and have a thoughtful conversation on their own, at their own table about something, or just a thought in their head about it on their own. By liking something, the algorithm will pick it up and push it forward. Or you could even write in the comments, hey, thanks for sharing this. Thanks for sharing your experience. I will think about this if you want to help push it forward. But generally, it's not really helpful for you to comment if you don't have something to add to the conversation. And it can feel to that person, I think especially marginalized people who I can't speak for myself, that okay, well, I said something and maybe it's being heard, but I don't think it's really being internalized. I don't think it's really being practiced. And so, yeah, I thought I'd bring that up because I want people to think about how we can receive information like that and paint a better future for people entering the hobby and people existing in the hobby. My table is for everyone, so I want to think about that thoughtfully. So those are my thoughts on the last bastions of gatekeeping. I think these are all, traps that we can fall into really easily, and they're at every table. They aren't based on necessarily ethnicity or gender or identity. They're just how people act sometimes, and they are key elements of why people sometimes walk away from the hobby or decide that it's not for them. So I would encourage you to, of course, leave more comments if there are any of these other things that this has made you think about and you want to share. Please put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear about them. So hey, if you like this video, please go ahead, give it a like, subscribe, stick around, join the Baby Bards. I put out new content all the time, all about being a player, being a dungeon master, and playing in multiple systems. So if you want my thoughts on storytelling, then by all means, join the fray. You can support my content here and on Twitch by joining my Patreon, patreon.com/HearthsingerGames. You will get access to sign up for monthly games dungeon mastered by me. Right now we're playing in 5th edition, and there are also opportunities to join our watch parties for different videos and do community hangouts. There are opportunities to get miniatures from Eldritch Foundry. There is a lot going on over there, so I encourage you to check it out. So for now, I'm going to take off and go think about what my next video may cover. Get out there and live your quest life. Bye!